Welcome everyone. Today's lecture or class will be slightly more structured than usual. So we'll be breaking it up into two parts. The first part would be basic Flutter, basic Dart. Okay, and for a lot of you, this might be a bit of a repeat of what you already know, but stay with me if you like, because there are some certain things that even experienced developers may have missed. So I'll try to spice it up a little bit, even if you already know this stuff. And the second part, we're going to look at a Flutter app that I've already built, a very simple app that's going to show you navigation. It's going to show you how to properly start your app. So with the loading process, because a lot of apps need initialization, it's going to show you how to use Navigator 1.0, the first Navigator sort of structure that came with Flutter. And then it's also going to show you a few other things. So when you so if you like to only listen to that one, you can maybe wait an hour and then we'll get to that. So the first part of this sort of lecture, we're going to start with this. I started writing a bit of an ebook here called Practical Dart, Learn Programming from Scratch with the Language Behind Flutter. And if you go onto the Patreon that I've shared with most of you, I think I've shared with all of you, but I will also give the link in the YouTube video or the video afterwards. You can see that there are 6 PDFs here that you can download, and these are 6 chapters that are already written of this book. And I just told Frank there'll probably be some changes to these chapters in time because it's still a work in progress. But and there'll also be about 20 more chapters, I think. So it is a work in progress, but if you want to start your Dart and Flutter journey, this is a great place to start. And then, of course, I've also built a little Instagram page here where I would post almost daily little snippets of Dart and Flutter code. It's like a quizzes, little questions you can answer, and it's just a great way to get like content to your Instagram feed. And that way, say you scroll and you look at all sorts of junk, every now and then you'll see something about Flutter, and it's going to help you on your journey. So the idea is to sort of help you learn by, also being in your social media feed. So if you want, you can follow learn_Flutter, etc. I just created this yesterday, so and I've put about 6 or 7 little posts up for you guys to engage with. So here it is. So I've got a few posts here, and yeah, feel free to join this or to follow this if you like, and if you already have. Thank you very much. And then on top of that, if you go to the Learn Flutter ebook here, it actually comes, chapter 1 actually comes with an assessment. It's a Google form, and it's got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 questions that you can fill in, and then you'll get a score afterwards. So it's just a little assessment. You can join. It's quite simple, I think, but I try to make it as tricky as possible. And this one is based on chapter 1 of the book. So once you read chapter 1, we can answer all these, or you can answer all these in your own time, and each is worth 1 point, and at the end of the day, you can get a score out of 10. So they're just multiple choice. Some of them are very easy. Some of them you got to really think about. Even I had to think about some of them, which is interesting, because I've done this for a long time. So I try to make it difficult even for experienced developers. So even if you think you know everything about Dart, some of these questions may be tricky, maybe 1 or 2. So let's start with chapter 1 here. And this is where we're going to explain the concept of a function, but we're going to try to think about the function in a kind of more of a general or mathematical way. So the reason why I wanted to start with explaining a function in the first chapter is because it's such a core concept of programming. So a lot of you guys, you probably start your Dart and Flutter journeys by they start talking about a variable. I've seen so many tutorials out there, and I don't always like the approach I take because I always think to myself, what if I knew nothing? How would I sort of grasp this? How would I understand this? And a lot of the tutorials I followed online were quite confusing, so I decided to make my own. So a function, as I gave two analogies of a function here. It's kind of like making a cake or baking a cake. A function has three parts. A function takes inputs, so something you put inside of it, and then it performs some kind of process. It does something with those inputs, and then it produces an output. So think about a function as baking a cake. So for the inputs, we have ingredients: flour, sugar, eggs, cocoa, all sorts of things baking a cake. Then we have the process, and the process would be the instructions, the recipe, saying mix the dry ingredients, add the eggs, add the milk, cocoa, and then bake at 350 Fahrenheit or Celsius, whatever you use for 30 minutes, or I don't know, that's about 140, 160 Celsius. And then the output would be a cake. So think about this is a function because there's three processes: inputs, process, and output. Then the second analogy I gave here is a mathematical function. This is more for people who are, math orientated, versus this is for people who are like practical. So think about the math function fx equals 2x plus 1, which is something that a lot of you may have seen in math class, maybe not, but it doesn't matter if you haven't. This analogy is good enough if you understand this one. This is just a bonus. So in mathematics, we can have a function like that. And in this case, it follows the same pattern where f would be the name of our function, f there. Then we've got x, which is the parameter. So x is x is like our inputs. So we put something in our function. And then this is the process, 2x plus 1. And so what happens is if we put something inside of our function here, say the number 2, the output would be 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. Or say we put 3 in our function here, the output would be 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So this is sort of like an analogy for a function. I'm sure you guys know exactly what a function is, both of you. So I'll just go quickly over this one. So then there's two distinct sort of concepts here that I think programmers need to understand. It also makes you sound smart if you know the difference between these two: a parameter and an argument. So in programming, we talk a lot about parameters, we talk about arguments, and it's just important to know the distinction between the two because I think communication is important. So parameter is the placeholder in a function's definition. So think about it as you've got a function, say, that calculates numbers, a and b. Parameter would be a and b, the names of the variables. And then the argument would be the actual value of that variable. So in the case of math here, the argument would be 3, the parameter would be x. In the case of a recipe, the parameters would be flour and sugar. And then the argument would be the type of kind of sugar or the type of flour you put in. So in this case, it's King Arthur flour, so it's a brand of flour. So it's just important to understand what these two concepts and what they're called. And then next we have a look at the main function in Dart and Flutter, which I'm sure you are again familiar with that, which is our main entry point of our application. So every single Dart and Flutter application starts with a function, which is why I wanted to start chapter 1 with a function, because this is the first thing you see when you write a program in Dart and Flutter. You see this main function. Now, this function is kind of interesting in that it actually does not have quite all of this, but it's still a function, and let me show you why. So it doesn't have inputs. It can have inputs, but it doesn't. It does have a process, but it doesn't necessarily have outputs either. But I will argue that it does have outputs. It has the void output, and I'll explain that in a second. And it does have inputs. It has, again, void inputs. Void is also a type in programming, which means the type of nothing. So it is actually, the input is nothing, and the output is nothing. So it is kind of something in a way. If nothing could be something, and we call that void. So I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. If I create a simple Dart application here, basic Dart, okay. Hello, Dart. All right, I'm going to create a basic one here. And again, if you want to create a Dart application, it's very simple. You just create a Dart file, and that's it. You've got your application. So I'm going to create a file called main.dart, just a simple Dart file. And here you can see I start my application like this. Okay. So here, I want to show you guys. This is the function name. This is the process. That is the output. And then this is the input. Okay. And in this case, the input is also void, right? The input is void. So input. And see, this program actually lets me run it, because putting that as the input is the same as putting nothing as the input, right? So this function follows exactly this process here, or this this definition here: input, process, output. Okay, input. Input, process, output. So, and this is what it's called, main. I mean, interestingly enough, this is just a side thing. The input of a function, of a Dart function, actually can have default this. You'll sometimes see this. It could take a list of arguments, and this is because if you look at command line programs, say you type in a program called Flutter run, and you do --d Chrome. This is a good example of a function. The function on the program is called Flutter. Okay. Then these are the arguments, args. So argument 0. So like this would be run. Argument 1 would be -d, and argument 3 would be Chrome. So I'll show you. Okay. Now we haven't gone in this tutorial. We haven't gone over what is a list or a string yet. But I'll make that clear. I know you already know. Some of my viewers will already know exactly what that is, and we'll make that clear later. And then for those who just joined, in the second hour of this class, we will be talking about Flutter. The first hour is just Dart, basic Dart. So in this case, we have 3 arguments. Sorry, a little confusing, but we have actually 1 argument, and the argument is a list. Okay. So in this case, if this were our Flutter application or a Flutter tool, then argument 1 would be that, the second would be that, and the third would be that. But then again, let's make sure we know the difference between an argument and a parameter. I get confused about that constantly, by the way. So don't worry if you also get confused. So an argument, again, is the value of the input, and a parameter is the name of the input. So in this case, this is a parameter, actually. And then the value would be the value of this list. So let me just run this application and show you what I mean. So let's print out, and we'll talk about the print function in a second. But I just want to show you guys something. Okay. So what we can do is we can run this function, execute this function in Dart, and we can see exactly what the inputs are. So if I do Dart main.dart, this is a way to run this function. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Dart. Oh. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So all right, so I'm gonna just clear this for a second. Okay. So let's start by running our function. So imagine this is Flutter run, and then we have three inputs that we provide here, and then when we hit enter, we'll actually print out these inputs. So this is the function. So as you can see, I'm providing the input to the function as a list, and then I'm printing that list out. So this is the inputs. The first A is main.dart. B is sorry, the first one is run. The second one is -d, and the third one is Chrome. So here, I just wanted to show that the main function actually can take inputs technically. Okay, so this is something a lot of people don't know about Dart and Flutter, and this is very standard in programming in C, C++, in many different languages. It allows your main function to take inputs as well. So what do you think, Frank? Do you think you understand the concept of a function, where a function has inputs, it then processes the inputs, and then it's got outputs, like baking a cake?
Yeah, actually, it's fine. It's all fine.
Yep. So the reason why, again, we start defining a function is because this is the first thing you see in any application. And we call this the main entry point of a Dart program. So you can also think about it as a front door into your application, where everything starts with the main function. Everything starts there. And then from there on, we can then do things like call functions within the main functions. So in Flutter, for example, inside of our main function here, we then call another function called runApp. Now, run app is a function that is defined elsewhere. So as you can see, our application starts here, and then we start running our app. We execute this function that is defined elsewhere, and it's part of the Flutter library. So, and here I've explained again that our main function has 3 parts. Main function has the 3 parts. It's got the output, which is void. It's got main, is the actual function name. It's got input, which is, well, nothing at this moment. And then it's got the process here, which is between the curly brackets. So this is often called the scope of the function. This is also a good thing to understand what the scope is. So we've got three words here that are relevant. We've got parameters, we've got arguments, and then we've got scope. And then, of course, we've got a function. So if you look at a function here, this is the body of the function. And then everything between this open curly bracket and the closing curly bracket, this is the scope of the function. We can also call this the scope. It's almost the same as the body of the function, which means everything outside of the scope, this is like a walls of the function. This is 2 walls. So everything outside of those 2 walls are considered outside of the function. So if I define some kind of something here, so if I define something here, this is outside of this function. It's outside of the scope of the function. I mean, this is what we say in the global scope. So this is part of the global scope. Imagine there's secretly a curly bracket around your entire application here, like this. And this is called global. This is technically then part of the global scope, and then inside of the scope is the main function. So you can think about it like this. We have an opening and closing curly bracket. We can actually create one in Flutter and Dart, just like that. This is valid code. So if I run this, it's fine. It just runs fine. I can run it here, and it runs fine. It's just an opening and closing bracket. And this is the scope. We can also put a scope inside of a scope, and a scope inside of a scope, and inside of a scope like this. And this looks odd, but that runs as well. And so think about what this means. If I, for example, define something in here, then, well, I cannot actually access, think about, this is part of this scope. So can I access this, for example, can I access this outside of this scope? So can I access it here, for example, if I say I want to print this value, hello? It will tell me I cannot. I cannot print hello there because hello is part of this scope here. It's confined within these 2 walls here. And now I'm trying to print something that's outside of the walls. But if I try to print it, if I go inside of its walls here, then that works. This doesn't work. I can also go here. I can print it here because these are walls within these walls within these walls. And so, as you can see, this is accessible there. So that's just a quick sort of understanding of what a scope is in Dart and Flutter. And then we've got our first Dart program here, which is a very simple program that just says, hello world. It just prints some text. So if you have a look at it, we can run that. And what it's going to do is just going to print this for us. So think about what's happening here. We have a function called main. This is the front door of our application. This is where everything starts. And then we've got this interesting thing here where this is a function definition where this is actually, we're calling it. So I know this might be, you're probably well aware of what this is by now, but it's still very interesting as a, even as a senior developer like me. I still love to look at the basics and see what exactly everything is. I mean, even if you hover over a function, you see this strange definition here: function, print, object, and then you've got all these comments just to explain what that does. There's more to things than it may seem. So what we do here is we're passing in, we're entering information into our function, and then we're getting an output to our function. Now our output, if we actually get our output from a function, our output is of type void. But this is valid output. I can actually print this output itself. Look at that. Okay, it doesn't let me print it. So okay, well, it won't let me print it, but we have our output here of a function. So this is the input, this is our process, and this is our output. So our output in this case is void. It's nothing. It's not going to give us any output, but we still have an output. And obviously this is unnecessary because we can't really do anything with that output. We can't do anything with nothing, right? So here's our function, basic entry point of our application, and then calling our main function here. All right, so this concludes like the first chapter here, where we're just talking about starting, or the main entry point of our application, or another way of calling it, we can call it the front door of our application. And if you want, this chapter is available again on Patreon page, and you can find it here in just chapter 1. So all right, well, let's move to something a bit more exciting in my opinion, but I find this still exciting. I find even the most basic things in programming still exciting, even as a experienced Flutter developer, because it's interesting when you have a bit of experience, but then you go back to the basics, and then you see a lot of things that you haven't seen before. For example, you see this. I just saw this function takes as its input an object, a nullable object, and we can go over what that is later. But why does it take that? Why does it not take a dynamic, or why not a string as an input? But yet it takes this as an input. So we can go back to what that means later. Okay. So let's go to chapter 2 here. And chapter 2 is about variables, which is kind of another thing that Dart does differently to some programming languages. So for you guys who already understand what a variable is, and maybe you already have a good understanding, the interesting thing about Dart is that every variable in Dart is a class as well, which is very strange. If you look at languages like C and C++, we have primitive variables like an integer, a double, a float, and these variables are not classes. But in Dart, an interesting thing, this is only for people who already understand what a variable is, but I'm going to go through that in a second. But the interesting thing about Dart is that every single variable, even the primitive ones, the ones like an integer or a double or a boolean, they're actually all classes as well, which is weird. This is something that Dart does differently to other languages. All right, so let us go just through a variable, what it is exactly. So imagine we have some kind of value. Say it could be someone's name, it could be a number, it could be an email address, it could be the age of someone, it could be information that we get from the cloud, it could be a response to ChatGPT or some large language model API. It could be the current location, it could be the current date. We get that information from somewhere, and then what we want to do is we want to store it somewhere so that we can use it later. Okay, we want to put it somewhere we can use it later. So imagine you give me some information. You say, here's how to bake a cake. You're telling me how to bake a cake, and I've never baked a cake before, so now you're telling me how to bake a cake. But we are actually at the airport right now. So what can I do with that information? You're telling me how to bake a cake, but I'm not in the kitchen, and I don't have the ingredients, and I don't know what to do with that information. So what can I do with that information? I can memorize it. I can remember it so that I can use it later. And so, or I can write it down on a notepad and then put the notepad in my pocket, and then I can use that later. So what we do is we store this information either on a notepad or in our brains, and then we can then call that sort of, or reference that information by some kind of name, and we call this a variable. So think about it as a box with a label on it. So, or a notepad with a label on it. So think about it like this. I have this. Let's do the following. Let's do the recipe, for example. I say the recipe is take the raw ingredients and mix them together. This may be the instructions for making a cake. Now, what I can do is I can then create a variable, and I start with var, and I can call this variable instructions, and I can use this assignment operator, which we'll get to in the future, and we can say take this information and store it inside of this variable, and now we can then use this information later. So we can, for example, we just saw the print function. We can print it, and so if we run this application, you can say print it there in the console, and we can reuse this information again, right? We can use it as many times as we like. So here it says I printed this 6 times. Okay, so let's run it here. Again, if you want to run a Dart application, you can click on run there in VS Code. You can also do it through the Dart command. You say Dart, you type your Dart file, your main Dart file, and then you say run, and you can see that I just ran this application and it printed this 6 times for me. So the interesting thing about a variable, the cool thing is we store it, and then we can use it many times over and over and over again. And then here's the interesting thing. Variables are basically storing information inside of the computer memory. So it's like telling me, hey, this is how you make a cake. And then I memorize that. I remember it in my brain. But then imagine the next day I completely forget it. Then what did I do with that information? I released that information. I forgot that information. And so at the end of your function here, the computer is going to forget this information. So here it remembers the information. It stores it there. It remembers it inside of this variable called instructions. We call this information multiple times. We print it multiple times. And then what happens here? The computer decides, okay, well, the application is finished. This means the application is finished over here. So let us clean up that information. Let's remove it from the computer memory. And that's what happens over there. Interesting. So if we define, say, another variable, so this is my age. My age is 33. That's how many years I am. And I print that. What happens there? I run it. It says it prints it 6 times, and then it prints that 33. And then at the end of the day here, it forgets it. Now let me show you that it is true. It does forget it. So I'm going to wrap this entire block here inside of it's called a scope. So I'm going to just make an opening and closing brackets like this. Now, as you can see, here's opening and closing brackets here, but inside of here is another opening and closing bracket here. And so what have I done here? I have now, I'm going to take this. Okay, let's say age. And I'm going to try to print it here. Now, why do I get an error there? Look at this application. Does anyone know why I get an error over there? Maybe anyone in the comments? Why do I get an error over here?
Yeah, just because you're out of the bracket. You should put the print just next to the. Okay, just follow the curly brackets.
Yeah, and not just that, but also this gets freed from the memory. So what happens is your computer says, okay, here is the beginning of a scope. Here you're defining a variable, and over here the variable gets destroyed. It gets removed from the computer memory, so it no longer exists. This means destroy. That's what that closing bracket means. It means end the scope. So this is like me. You're telling me, okay, for example, I'm really bad at names. So say someone gives me their name. So this is a new person that I meet. And this new person's name is Frank. Okay. Frank. Okay. So let's say we were just at a party or something, and I say, hey, Frank, hey, my name is Robert. And Frank says, my name is Frank. And then I walk away, and then 10 minutes later, I forgot his name. That happens with me a lot. So what happened was I forgot his name. So it's kind of like imagine this is my memory. I've got a short-term memory. And Frank tells me his name. And then later I want to tell someone about his name, but I forgot about it because it got removed from my memory. So this part here means, well, let's remove it from the memory. And so what we can do is we can actually define a new variable here called Frank, which is interesting. So this is interesting. We're defining a new one here, and now we can print it because this one already got removed from the memory. It already got destroyed. So we can safely define a new one. What we cannot do is we can't define two like this. So I'm just going to take this out for a second. And remember, these green things means comments. It means it's as good as nothing. So why does this give me a problem here? Does anyone know why this gives me an error? And so the reason this gives me an error is because the Dart language does not allow me to create two variables with the same name because when I want to print it, which one do I want to print? Imagine I've got his name is Joe, and I say new person is also Frank, and so now it's like, well, which one is it? Which one should I print? Should I print Joe or Frank here? This is confusing. So as a rule, we can only have variables that are unique. So maybe we want to call this new person 1 and new person 2, right? So that way we know exactly what to print. But if I already forget this one, so I create an opening and closing bracket, now that is valid because this one already, the computer already forgot about this one. So this is completely valid. So I'm defining a new variable here, and then I'm redefining, or not redefining, then I'm forgetting about that variable. Then I'm defining a new one called new person again, and I'm printing new person. So, for example, I can do this. This is interesting. So I can run this, and you can say it says it's printing Joe, and then it's printing Frank. So this is kind of cool. I'm saying create a new scope here. This is a scope. New scope called new person. Print that value. Then forget about everything. And then create a new variable here called new person, and then print it again. And then voila, that works. So these are two variables with exactly the same name, but they're in different scopes. And this allows us to call them the same thing. Now, when do we want to do this in practice? Typically, you don't really do this a lot in actual programming, but you would see me sometimes. I would create a function where I would create multiple processes like this, and each one may have same kind of variable names. So, for example, well, I can't think of an example right now, but it is common. This is completely fine to do in programming. And for you who are already aware of these curly brackets, remember in Dart, curly brackets can mean many things. It could mean that you're working with a set or you're working with a map, but it also means, in this case, it's a scope. So the language knows exactly what to do. So you can see Joe gets printed 3 times. Joe 1, Joe 2, or Joe 3. Do I have any questions about a scope and when variables get destroyed or removed from the memory? No? Yeah, cool. Thanks for the comments. I just saw Jovia. You gave a useful comment, and you answered my question, which is defining the same variable twice. Great. So again, these are sometimes things that a lot of people, they already know Flutter or Dart, but then there are basic things like this that they don't even understand. It's like what a scope is exactly. How does the computer know when to destroy variables? So even if you think you know a lot about programming, trust me, I thought I knew a lot about programming for a while until I started relearning new programming languages and realized there were a lot of things in my journey that I didn't actually understand. I didn't understand as a beginner. And once I understood these concepts, I really then started to really understand the structure and programming, and then I became really good at it. So there's these small concepts that is important to understand in programming, and one of these are scopes. So let's continue with variables. Now in Dart and Flutter, we can name variables. This is an important topic, naming variables. So how would you name a variable in Dart and Flutter? Now, let's look at naming, for example. I'm going to create a new name variable called Frank. Oh, sorry, called name equals Frank. Okay. So this is a good name. This is a good way to rename a variable. It starts with a lowercase. So it starts with a small letter N. And that's completely fine. Now, this with a capital N is not standard. It's not good to name any variable with a capital N. And why is that? Does anyone know why it's not good to call a variable, to start a variable name with a capital N? Why do you always see things like this, main with a small m? Why not something like this, main? Why do you think why do you think the standard is to keep it all lowercase? Yeah, so Roderick said it's reserved for naming classes like stateful or stateless. Now, that's almost true, but it's not actually reserved because it does allow us to do that. Look, I can do that. But it is kind of true what you're saying. It's kind of reserved, but not strictly reserved. So it does allow us, look, it works. So it does allow us to do that. But why do we not want to do that, even if we can technically do it? And the reason is because of our eyes. It's easy to, if we stick with these kind of conventions, which is standards, yeah, it's conventional, exactly. So it's not strictly reserved, but that you can also think about it like that. It's more like it's conventional. And the reason it's conventional is because if I have a bunch of code that I look at, so I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to go to, say, the second part of this lecture that we're going to start with in a second. So let's look at, where is it? Let's look at this application here that I start writing. If I look at just this quickly, I can see, okay, that's a function, and this one starts with a capital M. That's not a function, that's a class. So it's easy for my eyes to see what is what when I have these conventions. So if this was like this main widget, this would have, I could have thought maybe this is a function because this looks like a function now with some, this is called name parameters. So I was like, what is this, taking a function and calling a function inside of it? It's kind of confusing, but if I stick with this convention, it's really easy for my eyes to see what is what. So it's really for us as programmers. These styles are for us as programmers. So for our eyes, our human eyes, to quickly see what is what and to make sense of things. Now there are other conventions as well. For example, and we're specifically talking about variable names right now. I cannot start a variable with a number, like one name. Okay. The reason is because anything that starts with a number in programming typically is a number. In many other programming languages, you can create a value like this, 1U or something like that. You can create a value like this. Sorry, value. Something like this would be valid in some programming languages. It's not valid in Dart, but again, this is conventional across many languages, not just Dart. So we don't really want variables to start with a number either. The other thing we don't want is we don't want variables to start with like special characters or like an asterisk or a hash or like an @ or something like this, or have them anywhere in the, like this would be very confusing because all these characters here, they mean something else. Like for example, that means opening bracket, this means closing bracket. So it wouldn't make sense to actually have a variable like this, where in a opening bracket, it wouldn't make sense to have that as part of the variable name, because then it would be very confusing and you wouldn't be able to see what's going on. So as a convention, we can only use characters A to Z, uppercase, lowercase, and then numbers. But if you want to put a number in there, you can put them anywhere except not in the beginning. So you can put them at the end, you can put them anywhere here, okay? And now the other thing is, you can put uppercase characters, for example, here, but I would not start a variable with an uppercase character, just because it then gets confusing. Now, does anyone know what this is? Camel case, or snake case, or yep. So okay, so Jovia, you know what camel case is? So again, camel case is a convention, and snake case is another convention. Here's the difference. Everyone knows what uppercase is. So we got uppercase, we got lowercase. So lowercase is this. Uppercase is actually this. So uppercase is a convention to write something that we put everything in capital letters. Then we have camel case and snake case. And what is snake case? Snake case is when we do this. Snake case is when everything is lowercase, but instead of putting spaces there, we use an underscore. Okay, so I can, for example, say this is snake case, like that. Camel case is interesting. Camel case always starts with a lowercase, but instead of putting a underscore there, we actually put the next word. We start next with a capital letter, like that. Then we have something called Pascal case, which looks like that. We also call this upper camel case. So as you can see, it's like camel case, except the first letter is a capital. And this is, for example, the case we use for classes in Dart, the class, and many other objects, and enum, perhaps. Then for variable names, we always use camel case. So for example, I could say first name equals Frank. We don't use snake case often in Dart and Flutter, but in some other programming languages like C++, this is actually the convention. The convention in C, for example, is to use lower snake case as variable names, or Rust is another language. But here in Flutter and Dart, we use camel case. Now, another convention, which a lot of people don't know about, is say we've got an acronym. Say we've got an acronym. Think about it as GPT. Imagine we've got a variable like this. Now this is non-conventional, even though it looks great. Even though we've got an acronym there, which is 3 words, the convention would actually be to do this. This is more conventional. So even for acronyms in words, the convention is still to stick to this process here. So for example, if I can say my SAT score. So SAT is like some of you may know what that is. Or if I say, let's think of an acronym. I can't think of acronyms. Like BMW, you know the car BMW. So imagine I've got a program, and I work for BMW, the company, and we've got different models. Now, say I've got a variable called, let's think of a variable called something. Say I've got color of BMW. This would be a non-conventional way to write it, because we don't want acronyms to be capital, capital, capital. This is again, it's technically possible. You can do it, but it's again not conventional. So instead, I can do something like BMW model. This is a good variable name. This will tell me which BMW. So I can say 330i. This is a BMW model. Okay. Now I can also do something like this, model BMW. But now that's again non-standard. So as you can see, if I did this, this is a weird way of creating a variable name because now it starts with a capital B. So the convention is still to always keep things lowercase when you can, even if you are talking about acronyms. A lot of people don't do this, but that's just the typical convention. It's not strictly. It's not gonna. It just makes things more standardized. If you're very into clean code, I recommend you read this. It's called Effective Dart. So this is a guide. Here's a style guide, and it takes you through everything that is good and bad in working with Dart. And basically, these are a few things that I just described. It says what to do, what not to do, etc. There are a few things that I disagree with. This is a one that I disagree with completely. So sometimes I would not always stick to convention. So here is an idea where they recommend that when you define a constant variable, you start with a keep it all lowercase. I don't do that. I do this. I keep it all upper snake case when I talk about constants. This is one thing that I do differently than what they do. But again, it's probably best to always use these conventions. All right, I think this is enough for the first part of this session. If you guys want, I can move to the second part, which is more Flutter related than Dart related. So there's still a lot more to write about, and I'm still going to update this chapter. I haven't spoken about exactly the cases yet. But if you want, again, you can go on Patreon here, and you can read chapter 2. This is just about variables. And again, I'm going to update these chapters constantly. So stay connected with me here on Patreon, because these things are going to continuously update and improve. So yep. Do I have any questions before we move on to the Flutter part? No questions? Okay, cool. All right, let's start with the fun bit, the Flutter bit. So I have already written a little application here called, where is it? Hello Navigator. And so let's just have a look at the structure first again. As you can see, here's my Flutter application here. We've got a few files. We've got the build file and Dart tool. These are auto-generated files, folders. We got lib, we got web, we got git ignore, analysis options, and all these. Now, I'm not going to go through what all these are. I assume you already know what all these are, as this second part is for people who already know a bit about Flutter. So I'm going to look at the code itself. Now, the first thing I'm going to start with is the structure of my project here, because it's very important to structure your project in a way that is going to allow you to find things easily, that's going to allow you to communicate where things are easily to for other people. That's going to allow you to maintain your project. And because, I mean, think about it like this. If you have a confusing house, for example, think about it as a Flutter application as your home, your house, your kitchen. Maybe this is your kitchen, maybe that's your living room, maybe this is your bedroom. If one of these things are messy and confusing, and you want to maybe say you want to find your phone or your car keys, but your entire living room is a mess. But your entire living room is a mess. Where are you going to find your car keys? And also, like, it's going to be very confusing to find your car keys and things. So it's very important to structure your project in a way that's clean and that's organized, so that you can find things, and so that you can. So, does that make sense? So this is where I would say, what's the best way to organize things in your project in a way that's going to allow you to find things easily and to actually maintain and manage this project. So typically I would create folders for different parts of my application. Think about this again, like your living room, but instead this is called pages. So inside of this folder, we have all the pages for our application. So we got our main page, authentication page, we got our settings page, our say notes page, our profile page. Every single one of these pages gets its own little folder. Then we have a state folder. This is where, in this case, is where I place functions and classes and things that are responsible for managing the state of my application. And you've probably heard of this thing called state management before, where it's essentially how do we manage the information in my application in a way that is structured and in a way for me to understand how the information flows in my project. What's the best way of managing that? And in the future, we are going to look at state management for that. There are many ways to manage the state of your application. I like to keep all my state-related functions and classes inside of a state folder. That's the way I like to do it. We got a theme folder. And in theme, here I will put a lot of functions and classes and things that are responsible for the look and feel of my application, the theme. So imagine I tell you, hey, hey Frank, you're a Flutter developer. I want you to change the theme of my application, please. I want to change the red to a bit of a pink, or I want to change the whole color scheme from blue to green. Can you please do that for me? And then I give you the source code, and then you can go like, oh, okay, theme. It must be in here because there's a folder called theme. Now imagine I have theme related files and code all over my entire application. I've got some theme stuff in my pages. I've got some theme stuff here. What's going to happen is Frank's not going to know where to look for the part of the code that he needs to change. Because you imagine Frank and I, we work together, and I have to communicate to him, I want you to change something in the error page. I want you to update the error page. Now Frank can go, oh, okay, pages, error page. This is where I update it. Easy to find. But if I have all my source code all over the place, it's very hard to find. So it's very hard to communicate that idea. So it's very important to always structure your project in a logical way. Now, what's the best way to structure your project? That's a very complicated question, because it depends on the needs of your project. It depends on your specific project. And also it depends on your preferences. So different developers like to structure things in different ways. You've probably heard of things like clean code, or you've heard of many different state management solutions like Block and Provider and Riverpod and Redux and GetX, which is the worst one of all of them, by the way. So, and all these are not state management. They're tools to help you manage your state. But if I ask you how do you manage the state of your application, and you tell me, oh, I use provider, that's not an answer. That's just saying you use provider, but how do you use provider to manage the state of your application? Provider isn't state management. Provider is just a tool to help you manage the state of your application. So the same for things like Riverpod or GetX or Redux. So anyway, then I've got a folder called utils. This is just as short for utilities. And does anyone know what a utility is typically what is a utility in the context of coding? Does anyone know what a utility is? Well, typically, I mean, so a utility is typically some kind of supplementary functions. Typically, it's something that is that's kind of outside, that doesn't fit into anything else in your application. It's not a page, it's not a state, it's not a theme, it's not a widget. What is it then? Well, it's a utility. It's something that's just going to help you with your application that's kind of doesn't quite fit anywhere else in your application. It is also another way of thinking about it. Utility is also, well, think about the name, the word utility. It means it's useful. It's something that helps you with your application. It helps you with something. Then we've got another folder called widgets, and this is where I would put some of my widgets, my global widgets, reusable widgets in my application. Now, it's important to know that I'll get back to this one later, because there's actually two places where I put widgets in my application in the way I structure my project. Then I've got this thing called main widget here, and I've got main here. So main widget I can probably put inside of widgets there, but I like to keep main widget here in the lib folder directly. So let's look at it like this. We've got a main function here. We got a main function here. We've got our run app function here. You've seen this many times in our Flutter application. Then as the root of our widget tree, I've got this thing called main widget there. And the reason I call it main widget is because, well, it's the main widget of our entire application, right? It also says, okay, this goes into the main function. That's why I call it main widget. But some people call this app. You can call it whatever you want. I don't like the word app because the entire thing is your app. I mean, this is not an app. It's not really a very good name for it. So I just call it main widget. And so in this main widget, I have passed this function called init app. I'll get to that in a second. So let us look at main widget. So I have to find a stateful widget here as the sort of the root of my application, the main widget of my application. And the reason is the following. I have initialization logic here. So if I go to this file here, inside of my state folder, remember, I said everything related to the state of my application, I'm going to put in my state folder. Now, initializing your application is part of the state of your application because it's initializing your application. It's part of the state. So imagine I've got an app here, a function here, where I'm going to initialize my app. I'm going to start doing things like check if the user is authenticated. I'm going to read some information from my local cache. I'm going to I don't know, I'm going to initialize the GPS. I'm going to see if I'm going to start the GPS. I'm going to ask the user for permission to use a camera, for example. All these things I'm going to do inside of this function called init app, initialize app. I've defined it here in this state function. I also have a function here called is logged in. That's going to check if the user is logged in or not. Maybe to Firebase, or maybe locally, or to whatever service you're using, authentication service you're using. This function is going to check if the user is logged in. Now there are many different ways to use to create. I like to create a service, a login, an authentication service class in my application, but this is a very simple application, so we're just going to have this function called is logged in, and what it's going to do is we're going to pretend that it's doing some kind of backend call. So we're going to wait for 500 milliseconds here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to return whether the user is logged in or not, true or false. Okay. So let's look at this application. Let's run it for a second just to have a look at what it does. So I'm going to run it there. Now, as you can see, I've made this application. This is a web application. I like to, when I start to creating an application, I like to start with the web just because it's easier to debug for me. And then later I will change that to a Flutter or a Dart application. So here's the application now. This is what it looks like. And if I refresh this, you'll see what's going to happen. It's going to initialize my app, and then it's going to go to my home screen. Okay. Now imagine I say, well, we're not logged in. I'm going to put that as false. Okay. So in this case, it's going to initialize my app, and it's going to go to my login screen, and then we can log in, for example. Okay. So all right. So how do I manage this? Okay. In this initialization, function, I've defined a data class here called init app results. And so as you can see, it's just a wrapper. All it does is it's got a little Boolean inside of it that is true or false. So what I'm going to do is I am saying, check if the user is logged in or not. Then assign that Boolean. Well, we have to wait for it. This is an asynchronous function. Check if the user is signed in or not. Then assign that Boolean to is logged in. And then return this object. Return that. All right. So basically, I can have different things here. The reason I have this class here is because maybe I will have different properties here. Maybe I've got is logged in, is GPS access accepted, is notification access accepted, etc. Imagine I've got more here. So something like final bool is GPS access, something like this. And maybe I've got different properties here. So I can put in many things here, and the reason I put it as a class here is because then I can return multiple values easily with this. If I want to return multiple values as this function, it's good to wrap your result, or to create some kind of result class, and then return that result class. Does that make sense? So if you have a function that wants to return multiple things, okay, it doesn't just want to return a Boolean, it wants to return, say, multiple Booleans, then it's best to create a class, a result class, and then return that class as a result, and then have define the result. Okay, so how does this pertain to our application? Well, if you look at the main widget here, you see that I'm passing that class, that function, to the main widget. Now, is everyone aware of name parameters, like doing it this way? So this is called named. Do you guys know the difference between named and positional parameters? Okay, not really. Okay. Now this, I just want to clarify again. The second part of this class here is more toward people who have a bit of an understanding of Flutter already. This is why I'm skipping over a lot of things that you guys may know, may not know. It's hard to know exactly who my audience is here. I'm still learning. That's why I've divided the class into two separate parts. The first part is for Dart beginners, and we will start working with Flutter as well eventually, like Flutter beginner stuff. The second part is more toward people who already know a little bit about Flutter. So let's talk about name parameters and positional parameters. Now, earlier we spoke about functions in our application. Now I'm going to create just a basic function here. I'm going to say, I'm just going to call it function. Well, the function name is called function1, and I'm going to say, well, let's just say add. Now this function is going to add two numbers. Okay. So this is a basic function, as you can see. It takes two numbers, A and B, and returns the sum of the numbers. You've seen this many times. This is a very basic function. I can also create a subtract function. So this one is going to take the difference of A and B, and it's going to return that result. Okay. So these are called positional parameters. See, now I've confused myself. I always forget what the difference is between a parameter and an argument. Can anyone remind me what the difference is between a parameter and an argument? So a parameter is the variable name, and an argument is the actual value. Okay. So it's named parameters. There is no such thing as named arguments, named parameters. Okay. So now I've got A and B. Okay. These are positional, meaning this is what it means. So imagine I'm going to create a variable called C, and I'm going to say C equals add 1 plus 2. Okay. Now, what does that mean? It means add 1 plus 2. Now, what is the value of A in this case? The value of A is 1. The value of B is 2. Okay. We're looking at the position. We're looking at position. Position 1 is A. Position 2 is 2. This is why this is called positional arguments. Positional parameters. Right. So what if we use the subtract function? This is where things get interesting. I want to subtract A from B. I want to subtract 1 from 2. And so the answer would be -1, right? But what if I accidentally did this? But I actually meant I want to subtract that from that. All of a sudden, my answer would be 1 and not -1. So now I've caused what's called a sort of like I could cause a runtime error here, or not a runtime error, but a silent error, or some error in my application because I, as a programmer, forgot which one gets subtracted from which one. So B gets subtracted from A, not A doesn't get subtracted from B. So imagine I call this now base, and I call this value. Okay. So I'm going to call this base, and I'm going to call this value. Okay. So I'm subtracting the value from the base. So base is what we start with, and then value is what we subtract from the base. Okay. So in this case, the base is 2, and we subtract the value from the base, which is 1. Now, if I confuse myself and I put 1 there instead of 2, I can cause an error or something, or my application could not work properly. So the solution to this is what's called name parameters. So if we actually wrap curly brackets around that over here, and we give it this, we put this thing called required in front of these two. Now we've changed that to name parameters. Now we can say, okay, base, also value, and then we can use a colon, and then we can say base. Now we can do it like this. So now this function uses what's called name parameters. So we actually says value is 1, base is 2. We explicitly say which is which. So that way I'm not going to get confused between, okay, do I subtract 1 from 2 or 2 from 1? And I can also, these are non-positional. In other words, the position wherever doesn't matter. I can put base first and value second, for example, like this. See how I flip these around? But C1 and C2 is still going to be the same value. Now, let's look at our previous subtraction function. The previous one, we call this legacy. Let's say subtract legacy and say we call this, we remove this name parameter setup. Okay. So this is subtract legacy. That's a previous function. Now imagine I've got these things called L1 equals 2, 1. And I've got L2 equals 1, 2. Okay. And here you can see this distinct difference between when we use name parameters or positional parameters. These are positional, these are name. Okay, so look at what we do here. L1 and L2 is not going to be the same value because we flip these around. And do we flip these around intentionally? Or is it because we as a programmer got confused because we forgot which one goes where? Here is this, these are explicit. This is meant to avoid mistakes. So as a programmer, I have to decide when am I going to use name parameters and when do I want to use positional parameters for my functions or my classes or something. Okay. So what do you think would be the rule of thumb? When do I use named parameters and when do I use positional parameters? What would you guys say? When do you think it's a good idea to use which? So anyone who wants to maybe answer that question? I'll try to. Right, so I'll give you my answer. The answer is name parameters are meant to avoid confusion. We use this to try to avoid confusion in our application. It's very important to try to avoid confusion. Now, in this case, this is not really the best case of using a name parameter because we only have one. Well, no, this is a good case because we have two inputs. Sorry. So in this case, or in Flutter, when you define a widget, the convention is always to use positional parameters. So as you can see, here's the definition of it. You see this required here. You see these curly brackets in here, just like we did it here. So you see this question mark. Well, this means that it's not required. It's optional. This one is required. So, and now the actual argument, the parameter is called initApp. The argument here is called initApp as well. So make sure you know the difference between which is an argument, which is a parameter. So these things are two different colors, as you can see. They're called the same thing, but they're not the same thing. And that's why I wanted to make sure you guys understand the difference between a, where is that? So I wanted you to make sure you understand the difference between a parameter and an argument. So even if you are an advanced Flutter or a seasoned Flutter developer, you already thought you know about Flutter. The first chapter in this book about Dart talks about an argument versus a parameter. And so if you missed this, if you missed the first chapter of this entire book here, you may have not understood the difference between this and this. Now, these two are exactly the same name, but they're not the same. This one is the actual value. This is the label. This one is the parameter. This one's the argument. And so it says create a value called initApp. Assign the value of initApp to that called initApp, which is a bit of a trick. Now, typically, it's probably best to call this something else, something like that. And this way, you kind of avoid confusion if you're a beginner, because you can then see, okay, these are different things. But you should be able to know in programming which is which. So it's not really necessary to call them two different things in this case. Because if you don't know what the difference is, then I think it's important to go back to basics and then try to understand which is which here. So again, we've got the question is, when do we use which here? When do we use positional and name parameters? And that's a decision you as a developer have to make when you define functions and classes. Because you see, if a class if it only takes one value, it's often good to just give it a positional argument. If it takes two values, but the values are of different types, well, that's fine, because you're not going to get confused between which, right? Because in one, imagine you've got a function here called create display name. And we got, as the first, we got as the first argument, parameter. As the first parameter, we've got first name. And the second parameter, we've got, say, age, or say ID, short ID. Okay. Now we can say we're going to return a string as the result, and this is going to create some kind of display name. So the way we're going to create this display name is we're going to take the first name, and we're going to take a dash, and then we're going to put the short ID there, right? So if your name is Frank and your short ID is 123, then your display name would be Frank-123. Does that make sense? Now, in this case, we don't have to worry about name parameters because we can't confuse the two. Because say we've got a, say we have create a new variable. We call this display name. And we say create display name. Now, as my first name, I put Frank. And then my short ID is 123, okay? Now, this is fine. This makes sense. But if I say, if I accidentally, as a programmer, forgot which goes where, and I switch this around, then it's going to give me an error because this function expects the first one to be a string and the second to be an integer. But now flip these around, and this function tells me, no, you're not giving it the right, this doesn't have the right signature. It's called a signature, by the way. It doesn't follow the right pattern. This is wrong. Okay, so we've just caught a bug here before we even run our program. I just caught a bug. The program just caught this bug for me. This is called a syntax error. Okay, there are compile time errors. There are runtime errors. This is called a syntax error. So now we basically, this gives us a syntax error. Okay. Now imagine create display name is slightly more complicated. It actually takes a first name and a last name. Okay. It takes the first name and last name, and then it takes a short ID. And the way it creates a display name, it says take the first name, and then take the second name, say last name, take the first name, dash last name, and then put, say, a colon there. Like, create a display name like this. Okay. Now this is going to be slightly different. So now I'm saying the surname is Muhindo. Okay. All right. So another problem is now I can possibly cause a confusion here, because what if I accidentally swap the first name and the last name by accident? Okay. Now I've accidentally swapped the first name and the last name. So now this one is going to give me the wrong display name because I got confused as a programmer. I was like, okay, which goes where? Did I put is this the first name? Is this the last name? I'm not sure. And if you are in say in China, for example, I know people in China, when they display their names, they always put their last name first and the first name second. And it depends on the culture and everything. No, this is different. So how do I, because these are two data types that are the same data type, this function, this can cause a runtime or compile time error. Sorry, not a compile. This can cause like a silent error or something like that. Something that developers are unaware of. So in this case, when you have two data types that are very similar, you maybe want to use named arguments, because then you can't get confused. Because if I do this, if I put name arguments around them like this, right? Okay, like this, my function. Now I can't get confused. Now I have to label them. Okay, first name, last name, and then this is short ID. See, now I cannot get confused because these have specific labels. So as a programmer, I will always know which one to put where, because when I call this function, it forces me to actually label them. So that's why That's why this is important. Okay. I hope that made a bit of sense. Yeah. All right. So we have, as you can see, we have our application here. We've got this named parameter here. We're passing this argument, this value, to the name parameter here. Let's look at our main widget. Again, it's a stateful widget. I'm sure you guys know the difference of stateful versus stateless by now. The first thing we do is we are going to, since this returns this function that we defined, this returns a future of our init app results. So we're going to get this at some point, maybe after a second. In this case, we're going to get it after 2 seconds. Okay. What we want to do is we are creating a feature here with our init app results, and we are getting that feature from this function. So widget.initApp, which is here. We're calling this function, and then we're assigning its value to init feature, which will be a feature. Then you've probably seen this in our Flutter apps before. We start our Flutter app with our root widget called material app, and you'll see that we're using this thing called a feature builder. So we're passing that feature in the feature builder. So this means that feature builder is again, you may be aware of this. It's a widget that takes in the feature as input. What it does is it then checks, it updates, it calls the builder function if the state of that feature changes. So if the feature has not been completed yet, or if it has an error, or if it's been completed, it's going to call this builder when the state of the feature changes. So if the feature has an error, we're going to throw this text called unknown error occurred during initialization. Please refresh the app and try again. And then we're going to display an error page. If the feature does not have an error, we're going to display either the home page or the authentication page, depending on whether the user is logged in. So if the user is logged in, we show the home page. If they're not logged in, we show the authentication page. And so I'm sure you've seen this convention before, is logged in, and then question mark, and then the colon there. You can also use an if statement. If is logged in, right? Then we say return home page. Else, return. So this entire chunk of code can be simplified, and I just wrote it like this. So if this is true, then return that. If it's not true, return that. Okay. So, and then if the feature hasn't completed yet, we're going to show the loading page. So if the feature has completed, we're going to show this. If the feature has not completed, we're going to show this. And if there's an error, we're going to show this, right? So let's see how it works. Now, imagine there's an error here. During our initialization of our application, something happens, and all of a sudden, the app cannot initialize because maybe it can't connect to the backend, or maybe it doesn't. There's some error. So what do you think should happen then? So this is what's going to happen. The app's going to load, and then all of a sudden it's going to say an unknown error occurred during the initialization. Please refresh the app and try again. So I try to refresh, and it happens again. Maybe I don't have internet connection, and so I need internet connection for this app, and it should say, well, this app needs internet connection. Fix your internet connection and try again, something like that. Because So you can say what you can define which message to put here if you want to. I just made a very basic message. So let's try again. It doesn't work. And it's never going to work because we're throwing an error here. When I take the error away, then it's just going to load fine. It's going to work. Okay. So, okay, so let's see how is that. Okay, so as you can see, I am showing either the error page, the home page, the auth page, or the loading page here. So I'm seeing, did this initialization succeed? Is this good? If it's good, we show either this or that, depending on whether the user is logged in. We show the error page with some error text. If the user is not logged in, we show the loading page with some loading text if during the loading phase. We've got another part here. So part of material app, it takes this builder function here. So that is kind of cool. If I uncomment this, I take this out. What's going to happen is, see how my app is kind of like this. So if I load it, okay, my app is like this. If I log in, see how wide it is. Now, if you are on an iPad or something, this is what it's going to look like. Or if you're on desktop, it's going to look like this. But maybe I want to make this app accessible for people who are using it on the web browser and mobile phones as well. Okay, look how it stretches. It doesn't look very good. If it looks like this, it kind of looks good, right? Because this looks more like an app. So what I've done here is I have defined this builder here. And so what this does, let's call this. What this does is it wraps the entire page of application. It wraps all of this around our page. So this is our page widget. And our page widget would either be an error page, a home page, an auth page, or a loading page. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it in a colored box, which is just what you'll see here. It's just this. Where is it? This is the color box, this one here. So for example, if I make this red, you'll see that it's red here. Okay. But I didn't make it red. I just made it this color called inverse surface. This is from the theme. Then I'm going to wrap a safe area around it. Does anyone know what a safe area is in Flutter? So safe area is something, maybe you want to have a look at what it is, but basically if you have a phone like this, right, and you've got this curved edges on the side of the phone, okay, so you see my screen is not completely squared, and so what happens is some of the UI can be cut off because your screen is not squared, and so what a safe area does is it actually forces the size to kind of be this, it forces the display to be so that it never cuts off any information because your screens are curved, or there may be some kind of notch, or there may be some kind of like, some of the iPhones have a little hole at the top where the camera is. And so if you had some kind of UI that was like where the camera hole is, you had some kind of icon there, then all of a sudden you can't see the icon because it's behind the camera hole. So a safe area ensures that your app is only where you can see it visibly in your screen. That's never going to be cut off. So in mobile apps, it's a good widget to use. Then I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to use this thing called the constraint box, and I'm going to make sure that the maximum width of my entire application is going to be 600 units. Okay, so even if I make my screen wider, the maximum width of my entire screen here will be 600 units. So it doesn't matter what I do here. I can make it really wide. This is never going to be wider than 600 units. And this allows me to, as you can see, I can do anything with my screen. And it's going to allow me to keep it centered like this. So if this was a web app, then I can use it on my desktop and also on my phone, and it's always going to look good. It's not going to stretch all the way when it's not supposed to. See how it works really well, like that. Kind of cool. Kind of cool. So I just made my layout look really nice. It doesn't matter what device you use. So this is what this part does. And as you can see, I am using this theme for my app called My Light Theme. My Light Theme is defined here. Okay. So here we can define things like what the color should be like, what the text should be like, the shadows, the fonts of my application, what the buttons should be like. This button should. We can define the look and feel of your entire application. So here in this theme class, we can define exactly what your application should look like. So if I tell Frank, can you please change the theme of application? I want all the checkboxes to be slightly bigger, and I want them to have a shadow behind them. And then Frank can go here, and he can look at maybe this radio theme. He can change the radio theme, and all of a sudden, all the checkboxes or radio elements would be different in the app. Or he can change the icon button theme, and all of a sudden, all the icon buttons in my app would be different. So it's one central location to change the look and feel of your entire application. So imagine you wrote your application in a way where you've got hard-coded colors everywhere, and I tell Frank, can you please change all the button colors to blue instead of light blue? Now, if you didn't define the theme in one location, maybe you hard-coded all the colors across your entire application. Now Frank would have to go to every single page. He'll have to find every single button, and he'll have to change every single button to light blue or to blue. So instead of doing that, we can define it in one area, and then you never have to go all over your code just to make one change across your entire code base. So it's good to keep the theme in a separate file. As you can see, it's on the theme file in one location. So if we ever want to change the theme, we can do it instantly. So for example, look how it's purple. Purple, purple. And so imagine I say, I don't like purple. It's not my color. I want to change it to, say, a green. Okay. Now all of a sudden you see the entire thing looks different. See how the entire thing looks different? Now imagine I hard-coded every color here, and I wanted to change the theme. I would have to change it all over the entire app. Okay. So, and then I've wrapped this page around this thing called the clip rect. I'm not going to go over what that is. You can have a look at it when I share the source code with you guys. But basically that is it. Do you have any questions so far? I think, okay, that's all right. So I think it would be useful to share this code with all of you. I already have it written, and then what you can do is I'll put it on the Patreon and I'll upload it there. You can have a look at it. You can download the zip folder. You can run it on your computer, and you can actually play with this and see, maybe change it a bit if you want to, and see, maybe you want to change this into an actual app. So the idea is, this is kind of like let's just make this a yellow. I want to make it yellow. Let's make it yellow. Now, you've probably used Google Keep or the Note apps. So that's why I wanted to make it a yellow. So let's do this. All right, it's yellow. So the idea is, it's not a very nice yellow. It's kind of an ugly yellow. Let's make it a yellow accent. Let's make it that yellow. Okay, still not a very nice yellow. All right, that's okay. So the idea is, this is a kind of an app that is just a copy of a note-taking app where you would create a bunch of notes, kind of like your note app on your phone. Like I've got a notes app on my phone where I just make notes. So you just create a new note, you save the note, you can edit the note, and then you can log in. And even if you lose your phone, you still have your notes saved in your account. So here you would log in. Then you can change your profile picture maybe here, and you can log out. And you can delete your account there. No, I didn't actually put actual logic in there. It's just navigating. And then you would maybe, there's a plus icon there. You would create a new note. You put your note there. You'll add your note, and then your notes should appear here. And then maybe if you want to change the theme, you can go to settings and you can change the theme to a dark or a light theme. Okay, so that's the idea of this app. And maybe what you guys can do as a homework assignment, if you like, is you could take this app and maybe improve it. Maybe allow the user to, when they click on add note, it adds notes here. You can maybe even try to connect it with Firebase or some cloud service, or use it locally. So that's the idea. It's sort of like a baseline structure that to help you out, and then you can go on from there. So finally, this was actually about navigation. That's kind of what I try to cover in this class. So how do we navigate from screen to screen? Now, if I click on home, it navigates to home. If I click on notes, it navigates to notes. If I click on settings, it goes to settings. If I click on the plus, it goes to the new note. If I try to log out, it's going to take me back to this screen. Okay. So how do I do this? Now, I would define different pages for my application. So as you can see, all notes page, here's my home page. There's my note page, my profile page. So if I go to my home page, you'll see that I start my app with a scaffold. Then I've got this app bar. App bar is this thing there. Okay. Then I have a row. I've got my home text, and then I've got some icon there with a circle. And this takes me to the profile page. So I've got a row here. I've got home text. I've got a circle here. Let's look at it like this. So I've got this icon button here. I have home there. And you can see it's all in a row, because this is all in a row. And then here at the bottom, or here in the middle, I've got this thing, this text that says Home Sweet Home. And my bottom navigation bar, I've got this thing here, my bottom navigation bar. And so I have to find this here. So my bottom navigation bar is, here you can see what happens is I'm creating 3 items here in the bottom navigation bar. Let's say item 1, item 2, item 3. This one's called Home. This one's called Notes. And that one's called Settings. Each have a different icon. This one has a Home icon. This one has a Notes icon. And this one has a Settings icon. And then when I click on one of these, this on-tap method gets triggered. And so I've got a switch statement here that says, if index is this, then navigate to this page. If index is this, then navigate to this page. If index is this, navigate to the settings page. And if it's undefined, just go to the error page. So as you can see, here's my function that I use to navigate. It's easynavigator.off push. Easy Navigator I defined here. All it is, it's a shortcut to this function here. So to navigate in Flutter with Navigator 1.0, we call this function called navigator.off. Then we say push. Then we pass a material page route. And finally, we pass our page. Now, I'm going to end this lecture here. We can continue this next time. And we'll have a look at this again next time, I think, because there's still a lot to this. But I will share with you the code for this entire application. You can have a look at it, and you can maybe play with it. And you can even improve it. And then maybe next time you guys can show me what you've done. Maybe you want to add something in the home page. You want to maybe add a column here with a bunch of notes that you can click on that gets displayed. You want to put some logic in here because this is just, there's no logic to this. It's just navigates. So maybe you guys could do that for next time, and then share with me your code. And share it maybe with other people as part of this group on the Patreon or on Slack or WhatsApp. Share your code with us, and we can have a look, and we can all learn together. So I think we'll end it here today. Thank you very much for attending. It's an honor helping you guys out. I really enjoy this, and thank you very much for your patience. So yeah, I will share this code with you immediately. I'll just need to put it on the Patreon, and then on Slack and WhatsApp, I will send a link to it, and then you guys can download the zip file that will contain the code for this Navigator app that we just made today. And you can have a look at it in your own time. All right. Thank you very much.